Okay.
A consumer advocate says, in some countries, certain produce is routinely irradiated with gamma rays in order to extend shelf life.
Yum.
That's
Nope.
just a descriptive premise, right?
It's what they are doing.
And I'm on guard. See, because I think the natural reaction to that, and this is probably what the LSAC is kind of fishing for here, is you read that and you go, gamma rays, oh my God, that's terrible. Oh, we gotta ban that. We can't
This
have gamma
should
rays.
stop. Yeah.
Right. So that's the thing that I'm already on guard for. It's like, well, hey, that's a descriptive premise, and I'm not going to argue with you that in some countries they do irradiate with gamma rays some of their produce, but I'm not going to make any judgments about that. That could be the best thing that ever happened, or it could be the worst thing that ever happened, but I don't know yet. I just know that it happened.
Yep.
There are, however, good reasons to avoid irradiated foods. Any thoughts?
Well, it's just telling us that there is evidence, but it's not saying what that evidence is, and it's not saying what the counter evidence is. Like, there are good reasons to avoid it. Are there good reasons to also not avoid it? So right now, I'm just kind of like, the ball really hasn't moved forward one way or
I feel
another.
like there's an implied should in that.
There is this like you feel like the author's gonna say, "Hey, we shouldn't do
Well,
this."
if that's a
Good
premise,
reasons.
if
Hmm.
that was a premise of the argument, then I wouldn't object to it. But if that turns out to be the conclusion of their argument,
Hmm.
right?
Could be,
Then
yeah.
then they have actually made like a sort of a normative, they're making a judgment, and I'm not sure if that judgment is actually justified, right?
Yeah.
What are those reasons? And as you say, Ben, what about the reasons why it's good? You've already said that it extends the shelf life of the produce. Surely
Yeah.
that's a good thing. I
Yeah.
mean, we might cure starvation. Okay. Um, here. So it says first. So now I'm expecting like a list of the reasons why we should avoid, or I'm expecting a list of good reasons to avoid irradiated food.
Hmm.
First, they are exposed to the radioactive substances that produce the gamma rays. So it's not just the gamma rays, it's also the uranium or whatever that
Okay.
produces the gamma rays.
Yep.
Do you want produce that's been exposed to radioactive substances?
So this does require us to assume that things that have been exposed to radioactive substances is not good. They don't say that, but I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to say, yeah, that doesn't sound like a good thing to me.
Well, it certainly sounds like it could be bad, but it also could turn you into Spider-Man,
Yeah.
which
So
might be
I'm
good.
taking I'm skeptical, but I'm gonna like roll with this because I'm gonna think that's a reasonable enough assumption that it's bad that I'm not gonna require the LSAT to tell me that.
Yeah,
Even
it's
though,
one of those where
but
it's
I'm
like,
aware of it.
yeah, that sounds pretty bad. Okay. Second, irradiation can reduce the vitamin content of fresh foods, leaving behind harmful chemical residues.
Cool.
Okay. There's two bad facts there.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have to assume that vitamins are good
Yep.
because it didn't
Yeah.
actually say that. I mean, that's pretty common sense, but it's like, okay, that sounds bad. Reduce the vitamin content and also leave behind not just chemical residues, but harmful chemical residues, which sounds clearly bad.
Sometimes the LSAT makes assumptions, right? And people like to jump all over them. And then I'm like, hey, that's not like a totally crazy assumption. And they're like, oh, this stupid test, it's so subjective, right? Like here, you just talked about how it said it can reduce the vitamin content of fresh foods. And you're like, well, that doesn't sound too good, but I guess that's an assumption. Maybe vitamins are bad for you or something, right? Like, who knows? And I think we both agree it's a decently reasonable assumption to say that reducing the vitamin content of fresh foods is not a good thing. And so what I like to tell people in class is imagine you're standing in front of a large audience of academics or scholars. You're talking to them and you're like, "Hey, I just want to point out that reducing the vitamin content of fresh foods is a good thing." Like how many people are going to be like, "Huh? Like really? Like I don't really have time to hear this argument because it's just kind of stupid." So If
Right.
you think that most people in the audience, like the vast majority, are going to agree with the claim, then it's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah, it's in the instructions for the section,
Mm-hmm.
which people routinely don't read, but it is worth reading those instructions one time. It tells you specifically that you should not make assumptions that are by common sense standards implausible or superfluous.
Yep.
So don't go out of your way to add ridiculous assumptions to the argument. If you added an assumption here, vitamins are bad,
Yep.
commonsensically, that's probably not something we should add to the argument. Now, that doesn't mean that we automatically get to add the assumption vitamins are good.
Yeah, we don't necessarily assume that, but we're not going to like beat up the argument over something that's hard to see a lot of people
Yeah, we're not going to
agreeing
make
with.
arguments that are hard to make.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want to try to sell people on the idea that vitamins are bad or that exposure to radioactive substances is
It's
good,
good.
those are gonna be hard arguments to make. So you might just sort of note, well, okay, it would be great to add a premise that says exposure to radioactive substances is bad, and it would be good to add a premise that vitamins are good, but it's not a stretch, right? Okay.
Yep.
Third, irradiation spawns unique radiolytic products that cause serious health problems, including cancer. Okay, so they've piled up some pretty strong evidence, I would say. These do seem like reasons to avoid irradiated foods.
Yeah, they do. Mm-hmm.
But the question now says, each of the following, if true, weakens the consumer advocate's argument, except. It's an except question, which means that there's basically like 4 right answers, and then you just pick the other one.
Yep.
There's going to be 4 weakeners here, and there's going to be 1 non-weakener. Could strengthen the argument or could just be irrelevant. But 4 of these are actually going to weaken the argument. And the conclusion again was what?
That second sentence. There are good reasons to avoid irradiated foods. In other words, we shouldn't be doing this. Here's
See,
why.
it's the implied should, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's basically like it's kind of telling, it's like, well, here's a reason why it's bad, here's a reason why it's bad, here's a reason why it's bad, and those are reasons to avoid irradiated food. 4 of these answers are going to actually interfere with that somehow.
And suggest that it's not as bad, or as they say, basically, maybe it's okay to have these foods.
Okay. A says, unique radiolytic products have seldom been found in any irradiated food.
Okay. So that last concern is not as much of a concern as it sounded like it was. So although that doesn't necessarily mean we should go out and start eating irradiated food, it does weaken this argument because one of the premises has now been severely undercut.
It does not disagree with the premise at all. What it does is it says, well, yeah, even though it's true that irradiation spawns unique radiolytic products that cause serious health problems, including cancer. Yeah, I know, but those are rarely found in the actual irradiated food. So even if irradiation
I should clarify, it undercut the assumption that you're going to encounter those, right?
Right. So yeah, sure, irradiation does this thing, but if that thing does not end up in the actual lettuce that you're buying in the store, then it doesn't seem like it matters that much, right? So A is a weakener. B, so it's not the answer because this is an accept question. B says, cancer and other serious health problems have many causes that are unrelated to radioactive substances and gamma rays.
Okay, so there's more than one cause of cancer. That doesn't mean that radiation can't cause cancer.
But smoking, Ben, smoking is the #1 cause of cancer.
So what? Doesn't matter. If this radioactive stuff still causes cancer, it still causes cancer. End of story. Who cares if there's other causes? And they're the most common. So yeah, you know what happens on these questions a lot of times is like when I read the correct answer, I'm more like kind of just like, huh? What? And so I suspect this is correct, but it will be easier in some ways to get rid of the others because you'll see why they weaken.
You'll see
Whereas
that they
this one, it
actually
just
do
doesn't do
weaken.
anything.
Yeah, I mean, from my LSAT experience, and listeners who have been studying for a while might agree, that answer is actually a common type of wrong answer on a weaken question. So
Yeah.
here, it's pretty clear to me that if you come in with an objection like, well, but alcoholism also causes cancer, or like, you know, pollution, smog causes cancer. So what? I still, that's not a defense against the idea that irradiated lettuce can cause cancer.
Yeah.
It's just a real bad, it's an irrelevant weakener. It doesn't do anything.
Yep.
Okay. So we're now expecting, we know A is a weakener. We know that B is a typical bad wrong answer choice weakener, which means it's probably the answer here because this is an accept question. I would go into C, D, and E expecting them to weaken the argument. I think I would be pretty generous to them actually, because 4 of these answers are going to weaken the argument. So it's like, I'm not as like critical, right? I'm not like just, oh, that's bullshit, that's wrong. I'm going to read it and go like, yeah, okay, that weakens the argument.
Yep.
C says, a study showed that irradiation leaves the vitamin content of virtually all fruits and vegetables unchanged.
Okay. So what was it? The second premise? Yeah.
This is
Irradiation
I
can
really like this
reduce.
question actually. It's nifty because what was the premise exactly?
Irradiation can
Mm.
reduce the vitamin content of fresh foods, but how often does it do that? This says a study showed that irradiation leaves the vitamin content of virtually all fruits and vegetables unchanged. So this does not
Nope.
contradict the second premise, but it undercuts the assumption many people, including I think us, might have walked away with, which is, oh, if you can reduce the vitamin content, you do.
And it does, yeah. And there's a difference between can and does. Can just means theoretically possible, that one time it might happen.
Yep.
And C says, oh, sure, theoretically possible, might happen. Yeah, but a study has shown that irradiation leaves the vitamin content of virtually all fruits and vegetables unchanged.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, if something can happen, it may happen all the time. But the bottom line is we just don't know. We have no idea how often it
Yeah,
happens.
but we kind of fell into the trap, honestly. I did. I like when I was
Oh, yeah, I
reading
did
those
too.
premises, I was like, oh shit, so there's going to be these unique radiolytic products in the food. And A
Mm-hmm.
says, well, no, sure, irradiation does create these products, but these products are seldom found in the actual food.
Yep.
You know, both A and C are just nicely defending against premises that I thought were better than they actually were. D
Yeah.
says, the amount of harmful chemicals found in irradiated foods is less than the amount that occurs naturally in most kinds of foods.
What premise was this? Oh, it says leaving behind
The
harmful
second half of that
chemical.
second
Yeah,
premise. Yeah.
leaving behind harmful chemical residues. Um,
But how
that's
much?
interesting. This is like, oh, okay. There are harmful chemical residues, but not any more than anything else. So
Well, also,
what's your alternative?
no, but D even seems to suggest if it's true, if D is true,
Mm-hmm.
then it actually seems like this irradiation process might also be
Help.
removing some harmful chemicals.
Sure.
Because it's like, well, yeah, it can leave behind harmful chemical residues. But when we look at the amount of harmful chemicals found in foods that have been irradiated, the amount of harmful chemicals that's in those food is less than the amount that occurs naturally in most foods.
Yep.
Okay, so clear weakener, undermining the importance of a premise, not arguing with a premise, but just saying, well, yeah, even though that's true, it just doesn't really matter. E, a study showed that the cancer rate is no higher among people who eat irradiated food than among those who do not.
Okay. So regardless of all this shit that's happening, the cancer rate isn't any higher. So I guess at the end of the day, it's not making a difference. Yep.
Yeah, they brought up this super scary specter of cancer, right? Like if people read cancer, they go, "Oh my God, like wow, that's the worst thing."
Yeah.
You know, and What E does is it goes, well, yeah, irradiation does spawn these radiolytic products, and those radiolytic products do cause serious health problems, including cancer. But scoreboard, a study has shown that the cancer rate's no higher among people who eat irradiated food.
Yep.
Here, A, C, D, and E are all pretty good weakeners. The correct answer is B, because pointing to some other cause of cancer doesn't do anything. Who cares about other causes of cancer? That's not the point.
Yep.